third year doctoral student at Pace University. A little bit about my background. I've worked in the fashion industry forever and ever. I went to FIT originally and have worked everywhere from being a pattern maker to working with artisans in East Africa to running the New York City Fair Trade Coalition now. And I've always been curious who shapes sustainability. So much of the onus is put on consumers in order to change their behaviors, but through my doctoral research, really, it's the top management that has so much power and influence over the products that we consume. So today, I'm presenting on governance continuity, leadership transitions, and ESG performance in the fashion industry. Okay, so my research focus is really looking at the impact of the C-suite on ESG ratings. So how does governance-related leadership transition shape ESG, environmental social governance, performance in the fashion firms? So we're looking at if there are transitions from the CFO, is there an impact on the ESG ratings? I'm looking at the institutionalization of ESG, the fashion industry under heightened ESG scrutiny. So a little history is, I'm looking at from 2013 to 2023, 2024, and back in 2013, not everybody was reporting their ESG scores or seeking ESG ratings. But in 2015, the Climate Paris Accords were signed, so that really pushed companies to file. But as you will see a little bit later, there have been interesting ups and downs as ESG ratings become institutionalized. And for the most part, the research has really focused on CEO-centric performance. So the executive transitions, the theory behind this that I'm looking to seek clarity on is if there is a disturbance in one of the C-suite levels, do we see the ESG being impacted? So ESG may function as an institutional governance capacity rather than solely an executive level outcome. So meaning that a lot of times I'm looking at the board of directors for this paper. So this paper is a building block towards my dissertation. So in the future, I'm definitely going to look at CEO, COO. In the fashion industry, it's interesting, we can add in there the creative director, right? Which often other industries don't have, what their impact may be if they transition. So we see a longer tenure with the board of directors. So some of these boards have tenures of 44 years, such as a company like Ross Stores. So does that continuity, does that longevity help stabilize the company, or is it holding them back from making the necessary changes towards becoming more sustainable? And a little bit of background of the fashion industry, because I think I'm not going to assume that we all realize the negative impacts that the fashion industry contributes to, but we produce 150 billion garments every year, and it's insane if we think about that there's 8 billion people on the planet, why we are overproducing. 30% of those clothing have never been worn, so often those clothes are burned or put in landfill. There are high cancer rates because a lot of the clothing that we wear is laced with chemicals. So there are so many issues throughout the supply chain, and once again, the consumers, they are positioned to have power, but really it needs to come from the top down. So my hypotheses are CFO transitions negatively impact governance-related ESG performance, and CFO transitions, board transitions negatively impact ESG performance. So the idea is that whether it's CSR, which has evolved into ESG, the reporting lives in the financial department, where prior ESG often lived in the marketing department. So as it's transitioning, because ESG reporting is part self-reporting, part looking at the disclosure from stakeholders as well as disclosure of financial reports, because ESG is the environment, social, and then governance part. So if it's truly living in the financial, if there's a transition, we might see an impact if the CFO has a proclivity towards or knowledge of sustainability, right, is able to report it accurately.
Those two hypotheses look identical.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm
Sorry. So what I'm looking at is 18 publicly traded U.S. firms. So from 2014, 2013 to 2024. So the variables that I'm looking at are ESG as a whole, but then we also break out the scores. So there's an E, an S, and a G score. So I'm looking at CFO transitions, board turnover, and my future research is definitely looking at board characteristics. Right now I did look at the percentage of females on the boards, and the methods that I'm using: panel regression, firm year fixed effects, a laggard model, and doing robust analysis. So the key findings so far is that there's not any significance when there's a CFO transition. There's inconsistent when it is board turnover, but the average tenure, there's a positive, consistent association with ESG. So once again, if there is continuity in the governance side of things, we do see that there is, appears to be, it is more important than an isolated transition. So what's interesting is if we look at the tenure of a lot of these positions, my future research will show that the creative director has the shortest tenure, it may be 5 years. If we think of like big fashion companies, there might be a scandal, there might be negative sales, and they have to go, and they may actually get sent over to another fashion company. So it's not as if this creative director is, messes up and heads out the door. They get mixed around to different companies. So that's interesting to think about how that might impact if they have sustainable orientation and they go to another firm, they might carry that with them. But a lot of the times the CEO is connected to the creative director. So if the creative director messes up, the CEO also has to go. I'm really interested to see what happens when the COO, right, the Chief Operating Officer, how they play into the mix. But the boards, they often have the longest tenure, maybe 15, 20 years plus on average. And then the CFO also has a pretty long tenure of 15 years. And I say pretty long because in the fashion industry, there's a lot of movement all the time. So unexpected findings. Once I mapped out the ESG scores over a longer period of time, we saw a significant dip in 2018. So like I said, we really started reporting in 2013, 2015. People got more on board because of the Paris Climate Agreement. And then 2018, what happened was a lot of the rating agencies, they increased their standards. They were able to get more data. The fashion companies were getting a better understanding of how to collect data and how to report data. And then we also see a slight disturbance in 2022, 2023, and that's connected to DEI and the degradation of DEI in the United States.
Just clarification, what's the red line, the bottom line?
So the red line there is the mean S. So each one is, so ESG as a total is the solid, and then E is the green, or environmental is the green, S is the social side, and then G is the governance side, so they're split up. Now, what's interesting about the fashion industry is most fashion companies are not vertically integrated. They don't own their factories. So when we're looking at the business behavior, we're really looking at things that are happening on the US side. Now, they may pull in some facts and stats from their partners because they are producing in other countries, but they may not have access to the in-depth information as if they own the company. So it's a challenge to really feel that these scores are legitimate, right?
Because they're outsourcing their production, right?
Yes. So these are from S&P Global, and I did a terrible, terrible mistake. I brought in another data set of ESG, which had a totally different trajectory, but that company was self-reporting. So I'm like, okay, maybe that's the future research I need to look at is ESG ratings and how much we can really rely on them. There are different methodology for collecting information, but we had to delete that out of the brain for this paper and this presentation. So the contribution extends leadership research beyond CEO-centric models, introduces governance, continuity, perspective, and ESG research, highlights institutional complexity of ESG measurement, as I just said, and provides longitudinal evidence from fashion industry context. So as I mentioned, the next steps, I'm going to pull in these other variables. I'm going to leave marketing to the last bit, I think. Right now, because of this paper, I really have a lot to think about over the summer on where I want to take my research for my dissertation, because there's a lot to dig into here. So in closing, the findings suggest ESG performance may depend less on isolated executive change and more on the institutional continuity of governance systems over time, which is good, right? A stable organization, if one person changes, there shouldn't be significant change. But once again, when it comes to ESG ratings, I have a lot of friends who work in sustainability, and it is still very isolated. It is still not considered an important part of their business. You look at a company like Patagonia, and Patagonia takes it very seriously. And then you look at a company like Levi's that you would think takes it very seriously, but mapping out their chart, they have large gaps where they did not report. So a lot of it can just be, right, marketing or greenwashing, as we call it. So I have some discussion questions, but I would love to hear your thoughts on any ideas, where I could take this. Yeah.
I just have one question.
Yeah.
The firms that you're looking at, are those US only firms?
Yes.
Okay. Eventually, are you going to look to see, are there regional differences between US firms versus maybe European countries that take the Paris Accord?
Yes, absolutely. I'm going to look at European, but I might look more at the characteristics of the CEOs. Do they have international experience? So if they have international experience, does that impact how they govern? What's interesting is that you look at a company like Nike, they're a global company, right? So I think to your point, it might be more interesting their board, how much of an international perspective they have versus, their homegrown U.S., haven't touched outside and had that experience. Yeah.
A related question occurred to me to what you just said about the board characteristics. How much variation do you think there is in the role that different boards have with respect to the ESG issues? Is there different degrees of activism and attention?
Yeah.
And what would that variability, if there is, and I imagine there would be, what would that do to the data?
Yeah, and I have that data available, seeing which ones hold positions within the firm and which ones are just sitting on the board, right? And they may actually sit on multiple boards. Right. So I think it's really interesting to look at the profile of individual board members to see if their influence might have some, impact in different
These
companies.
days, some boards have a role of some kind.
Yeah.
ESG subcommittee or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And others don't seem to have any attention much to it at all.
Yeah. What I brought in thus far is looking at the ESG ratings, but then also looking at their SEC files. So I haven't brought in their corporate social responsibility reporting yet. So that will be the next step. The original paper that I wrote and broke out part of this was actually looking at the creative director's level of hubris. I found an article that can measure their levels of hubris. So if they're a creative director that comes in and is, outlandish and trying to maybe do a fashion show or a collection that is racially charged. We've seen that on the catwalk. Or if they're really interested, like Stella McCartney, in recycled materials, then that could be something that's brought in. So looking at not just maybe their age, their gender, their race, their orientation as it relates to sustainability, but other characteristics as well.
Awesome. So I just wanted to ask that for, like you rightly mentioned, data reporting for different firms differ. We have the GRI, the SBS.
Mm-hmm.
So like in the fashion industry, have you been able to see a predominant preference for a particular type of reporting? That is one. And then two, for the data you kind of broke apart, the E, the S, and the G.
Yeah.
Did all of those data, aside from the one you said you made a mistake of getting from another source, did the bulk of it all come from just S&P Capital or, okay, so yeah that's fine.
What might be interesting is to also look at what type of certifications or how many certifications they have, right? Like if they are fair trade certified or what different alliances that they're working with.
Alliances are good for fashion industry. And also, I don't know, it's a bit complicated because I also am very interested in the sustainability side of things, is how operations outside of the home country operations impact their ESG. Because where you're operating in, say, countries like China, Vietnam, India, how do you really aggregate your ESG score? How does that really play into what is reported as the composite score for the ESG? That would be another thing that would give a basis for other industry to kind of start breaking things down a little more.
Yeah, what I think this really has shown me, we think that the brands have so much power, but they really have less power than we think. It really lives at the factory level. I was talking to my colleagues and they were lamenting about how innovators go to them and say, we want to use this new technology, right? This new fabric. And they'll do a pilot project. They'll make shoes out of mushroom leather. But the pricing lives in the garment. So they'll say, how much does this increase? They'll do a pilot project. They'll say, the sales didn't make sense. But what they really need to do is go to the manufacturer, because if the innovation doesn't directly plug into the manufacturer's capability, it's not going to happen, right? It's not scalable. So you look at industries like the automotive industry, which like 40% of their budget is R&D, and in the fashion industry, it lives in the garment. So there's really a lot of issues with growing sustainability at all different levels.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.